Mention. Any mistakes today? This is my goal, so just bear with me. Well, I broke my machine here, so we'll start right here. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Bolin,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Kimmelshue,
Here.
Chair Connolly,
Here.
Commissioner McGreehan, Commissioner Duncan, Commissioner Betts,
Here.
alternate Commissioner Rust, alternate Commissioner Bradley, alternate Commissioner Ritter, alternate Commissioner Shepherd. Thank you.
Consent agenda. The only thing on there is approval of minutes of September 7th. Is there any errors or corrections? Board members have? See no public comment. I'll entertain a motion for consent.
Move to approve consent.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next up is our regular agenda. Review and consideration of amendments to draft contractual services agreement number 3 with the County of Butte for the provision of specified services, contractual services agreement amendments.
Commissioners.
We're here.
Go ahead.
No, red is off.
It's always backwards.
See, watch.
My apologies. Good morning, commissioners. This item is been on your agenda for quite a few months now, considering our contract amendment with the county for both services of various nature, things that are both legally required under the law, things like the auditor, clerk recorder, public works, surveying, that kind of thing that is required by law for the county to provide information and cooperation with us. The part that was a problem was the human resources component of our contract. And as you know, that biggest part of that was we only used human resources for the purpose of operating our payroll. And the county, when they switched from work or from their previous platform to Workday, it created a problem for the county in creating a lot more hours of work for them to process our payroll. So for that reason, they had decided to advise both LAFCo and the Butte County Association of Governments, BCAG, that we would both need to terminate those services from the county and transfer to a new private, different vendor. So we have done that. BCAG went first and they chose a firm called Paylocity. We then followed up with the same firm, thinking that would provide a little easier transition for us as they went through it first. And that has happened. We are currently in the process of learning Paylocity. And in fact, this particular pay period coming up will be our first payroll that will be run through an outside vendor. So we are there as far as the switch over. We are not there as far as training. There's a good bit of things that have to be done and a lot more steps that we had not traditionally done in our shop, but county payroll had done for us. Paylocity will do some of those things, but not all of those things. So we still have to, multiple steps are involved in terms of running payroll. And the biggest part of that, or the hardest part of that, is also making sure we coordinate our PERS payments and our healthcare benefit payments through PERS. So I don't want to get into the weeds on that. It's a lot of mechanics that go on. I will give Crystal gold stars for working really diligently with county staff. They've been super helpful to us, as have BCAG staff. So, well, as you know, I'm far from pleased that this all unfolded the way it did. We are past that. And today, what's in front of you is a revision to our original contract. So just real quickly, for those of you who may not know, the report pretty much tells it out that we started this in 2001 when we separated from the county as a separate division, separate department, if you will. At that time, the county basically said, you need to leave development services. The commission wanted to leave that format because there was a lot of conflict. We did so under a contractual agreement, which meant the county was going to continue to provide certain services, which is also attached to your report. In 2007, we went independent, which is when we got a separate federal ID so we could, and our own PERS contract was entered into, and we were a completely independent agency at that point. Still, though, we relied on the county to provide certain services, namely, again, payroll through HR. The other things that we deal with the county on, the auditor, the treasurer, Those are all, again, legal obligations that the county has for us regardless. So those things are still in here and we pay for that time that they spend doing those things. But nonetheless, our money sits in the treasurer. So like many of your agencies who also use the county treasury, we're in that same boat. So we still have to kind of work through the county and Workday. This doesn't get us out of Workday by a long shot. It just means our payroll no longer goes through Workday. So in 2013, we reevaluated this contract and updated it with some new information, some new numbers, and had not really touched it since that time. The county came back a few years ago and said it was time to go through this process. So aside from payroll, which I discussed, I'll just walk through the only real significant changes. And I'm going to ask you to look at two things. There's attachment 1, which is the county revenue agreement. I'm not a big fan of this particular format. But if you look at the attachment 2, which is the actual agreement that we originally executed with the county, that shows in track changes what we have agreed to change within the contract. It's not different from what the county's cover sheet shows, but the county's cover sheet only tracks them as they go. My preference is to have a contract that's fully written out and you see the amendments and sign that contract, so you don't just have to go back and pull documents. It's not my choice. So I created a track changes version for you folks in attachment 2, just so you could see what the significant changes were in the contract with strikeout in it. So I'm going to run through that real quick because that's just the easiest way to do it. First and foremost, while they were not necessarily agreeable at first, you can see in red there, written notice will be signed by the authority initiating notice, the Butte County Board of Supervisors or the commission respectively. That was fundamentally important to me, and I was not going to stop until that was in the contract. Because as you know, I'm not satisfied that the county staff, without board direction, began this process without even involving the Board of Supervisors. And I think that was a fundamental flaw. Nonetheless, it occurred. They did it. They have the right to amend this contract as they see. I just think it needed to be started with the Board of Supervisors. No less than if I wanted to amend the contract, I would have come to you folks first to get your permission and a consent to me to make that approach. And I think the county staff should have gone to the Board of Supervisors first to do that. This will have avoided that process, and this contract will ultimately be on the board agenda, I assume, in your meeting in November. So that's the best thing that we renegotiated, was forcing this up to the 2 legislative bodies for future changes. And as you go through that document, you'll see on section exhibit A, I should say, for LAFCo services, it'll become effective November 1st. And you'll see where we just, in this first section under information systems, really no fundamental changes, just a reordering and a reconstruction of the services. What really matters is that communications went up a little bit, only $100, and accounting services stayed the same.
But it dropped in.
General services stayed the same. Treasurer went up a little bit, but not by much, a few $100. Human resources is the big change here. So what you can see in all the strikeout is what we used to have in the contract. You can see all the things that the county had originally contracted and agreed to serve LAFCo for. All that's struck out now because most of it related to payroll and or some way revolved around payroll. So as you can see, the 3 things that will remain will be the MetLife deductions, because there are certain things that we just don't have access to, and to get them would be moving mountains. So the county agreed that they would continue to make the adjustments and the payments for certain services, which is life insurance and disability insurance, and support and assistance for training on CalPERS reporting, which is something else that our staff, Crystal, will have to undertake, and we will take that in-house. We have never done that before. I'm not saying it's a difficult thing to do, but it does require weeks of training and repetition before it becomes a simpler item. That's the fundamental changes on the contract right now. So I'm recommending that you approve this contract and we move forward, and we put this behind us, and we continue to work cooperatively with the county on all other fronts. And I hope we don't ever have this particular problem again. Any questions that I can answer for you?
Yeah, GIS data support is somewhat, looks like there's a strikeout.
So if you look at, I'm sorry, Bill, it's through the number, but it shouldn't have been.
Okay.
It's still there.
All right.
That's instrumental. And just as you bring that up, so part of why, just briefly, why this cooperation is so important and why I didn't think perhaps folks in administration at the county didn't see the full picture is we have to provide that information and we have to have information back from the county. It serves everybody's purpose to have one good GIS platform that contains all the information. So that's just one example of the cooperation, whether we pay for it or they pay for it, or there's no compensation at all. That is good for everyone. And that's just good government. That's how it should work. Nonetheless, it's there and we will pay our $1,600 a year per employee under that contract to do those things. And it's not a deal breaker from our budget. It's just disappointing that our relationship and the cooperation could have been stronger in this regard. Any other questions?
2 questions.
Yes, sir.
On item 6, human resources and exhibit A. My general question is, how did you get the county staff to agree to provide transition assistance at no charge?
They were kind enough to do so.
Good,
I
okay.
mean, I don't want to say, there were things about this that I did not like at the beginning, but now where we're at working with their staff and making this
Right.
happen, they have been incredibly cooperative with
That's
us. So
good.
they were more than willing to, this isn't going to be forever, but should we have questions because they are so intimately involved and they have multiple staff?
Mhm.
As I've said to you before, our biggest problem with this is not doing the work, is that there's only 4 of us and soon to be 3 of us. We
Right.
have no depth of bench to pick up, whereas the county, someone doesn't show up one morning to do payroll for their job. There's 6 other people who could help out to do that. We don't have that backup.
Right.
Right.
The other question related to human resources, it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, but that the 2 items A and B are repeated twice.
I see that. I didn't
So-
catch that. There's no reason for that. That's an error.
So you'll amend the.
That'll be
agreement?
cleaned up. This was really for to understand what was struck out and what was added. The form that the county provided us is the one that Mr. Connolly, should you choose to approve it, will sign, and that'll go back to the county, and then the Board of Supervisors will hear it on their end, probably a month from now. Thanks for that catch. I appreciate it.
And I got a question, Steve. You're still receiving, or you have access to voter registration data from,
Yes, we do.
is that under a different agreement? Because I don't see it listed here, but
The reason it's not listed there, if you go back to the beginning of attachment 2 and you look at statutory support services and cooperative support services, those are the things that we all just agree that have to be done cooperatively
there
without
it is.
charge because they're required by law. So if you read through that, you'll see access to property information, auditor controllers information. At that time, we were still using the county boardroom before Oroville so graciously offered us this facility. Access to files, again, voter record information is C under 2.2. So those were things that, as I mentioned earlier, we don't pay them for that. Those are things that the law requires any county to do with respect to their LAFCo.
thank you. Yeah, I didn't see paragraph C.
No problem.
Well, any questions or further comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I move acceptance.
I second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Executive officers report. Oh, public want to speak? Casper, come on out. Casper the ghost.
All right. Executive officers report, 6.1. So as I pointed out there, just real quickly, we continue to work with county HR on the transition. This next item is pretty interesting. This is involves hazard mitigation and disaster planning. So your staff attended a session up in emergency services put up in Chico a couple of weeks ago, which was really an eye opener in a lot of ways. It opened our eyes up to all the various stakeholders that are out there. Why this is important at LAFCo is we have this sort of critical step where we offer this service where we have all of the resource information for all the special districts and the 5 cities in our county. It doesn't make us experts on any of it. It just means we have access to a lot of data. And what is becoming more apparent throughout the state is that LAFCOs, when they're starting to review agencies, we used to just look at things like, can you provide fire and police and maintain your roads? And are you following the Brown Act? Is your budget in balance? You know, kind of what I consider the basics. Well, one thing that has become very apparent in the last 5 years or so, maybe a little more, is the frequency for which we've been having these disaster situations, natural hazards. And agencies are now having to really just sort of add a whole nother scheme of service. And I'm sure Mr. Bowen can speak volumes about this. What the town did prior to 2018 to what they do now is night and day with respect to disaster preparedness. And thank God that you've stepped up and did all those things you did. But that's all around the state, and a lot of agencies just aren't there yet. And part of the process that we see at LAFCo and LAFCo sees is that we should evaluate that as another service component. We want to be able to look at a town like Paradise, let's say, and we do your MSR. When we get to that section, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Are you meeting some of these minimal qualifications? And of course, with your situation, we're probably gonna be able to check every box. But there are agencies who still have not gotten there yet, either because they haven't had any, or maybe they don't think they're ever going to be subject to any kind of a natural disaster. But as we all know, that can come out anywhere for almost any reason anymore. And none of our cities in this county are immune from floods or wildfires or earthquakes. So these are all things that communities now need to really take into account. And interesting, just as an illustration, and I will use this at a LAFCo conference a couple of weeks from now. Shannon's been actually took on the point to manage a session just on disaster preparedness. A couple of years back, Bill and I did one on disaster recovery. Well, we had to stop thinking about recovery, and we have to now get out in front now and start to be in the position of always be in the preparedness mode. Recovery is going to come whether we like it or not, but how well you're prepared makes the difference. And so one example is, some of you may have read this in the Sacramento Bee. Sacramento Fire Department has now been tasked with leading on point the entire homelessness issue. If you look at their structure now, that puts Sacramento Fire above behavioral health, above police, below public works. They are now managing that entire process for reason why they're trusted, for one, for those groups of people, and two, they're already rolling on most of these incidents with homelessness. But interestingly enough, now that's been put under their umbrella. I don't know if a lot of other fire departments would want to do that. I mean, I know they want to go out and help on medical aid, but do they really want to be in charge of running all the stuff like behavioral services? For one, is that's a tough nut to crack. And now suddenly you have a fire chief who has to add yet another hat to his role. I haven't seen that anywhere outside of Sacramento yet, although, as you all know, Sacramento has a particularly egregious homeless problem to the point where downtown is almost barren. So having said that, we are going to move forward with this conference, and we're going to start looking at local hazard mitigations and recovery plans for each of our agencies. And one of the things that I'm going to produce over the next year is a guide for the county, which will identify all the local agencies. And I'll pick on South Feather as just an example. South Feather has a fleet of vehicles. They have folks who know what they're doing. They know how to put up road restrictions. They know how to do certain things when there's a crisis. That's a resource that could be available to county fire or county OES or the sheriff's department, where you don't have to have a sworn deputy at a roadblock. You can have other people do that if you have those people. And we have 41 special districts that we can tap into to help us and help the county with resources when the time comes. We just have to know how to connect all those dots. And I think we play an instrumental role in helping the county connect those dots. And last thing I want to add on that is just, we just recently were invited to be stakeholders in the reiteration of the local hazard mitigation management plan. We were just contacted by the county administration this past week, and we of course gladly agreed to participate and offer any information we can provide as well. So it's just an interesting new field, something that, you know, when I started doing this in 1993, this was never even discussed, let alone anybody even had any real issues with it. So
can I say that what you're talking about is incredibly important. I can't tell you how many jurisdictions I talked to, and I asked them, what are you doing to be prepared for? And every case, they said, well, we haven't got to that yet. And even, I mean, you can even take Maui. They knew they were in a high fire hazard area. They knew that. And they hadn't worked out their water issues. I mean, you see the guy that just cut the water off. All the issues, all the response issues were not thought through. And they knew that. And something's got to happen where everybody thinks it's not going to happen to me. We thought that. We had practiced before. We had practiced our egress and our different things. We knew that, you know, there's enough fires that skirted us. We knew that was a possibility, but we never thought the big one would hit. These jurisdictions don't, you know, they're just thinking, yeah, that was, sorry what happened to you, but it's not gonna happen to us. And they go on life. So I think what you're talking about is incredibly important.
Appreciate that. So, yeah, it's the LAFCo role is ever evolving. And as I think Mr. Conley would agree, sitting on the Cal LAFCo board is, you know, the days when Cal LAFCO just moved boundaries around, that's long past. We have a much more critical role. And I'll say this, which doesn't often get said, but it's the diversity of all of you. I have the benefit of getting different perspectives from people from special districts, from the county, from the cities, and a public member. Most agencies, they get it only from their staff, and it's a sort of a one-way connection. I get the benefit of hearing from you, Greg, about Paradise and things that I might never know about. I might hear from Ruth about things that are going on with the Feather River and you know, working on the levees and drought flood protections, things that I might not know about. So these are all great things to learn.
So my question is, how would that work in conjunction with the grand jury? I mean, I'm sure they have their lane too, and I'm not so sure that's not part of their lane also. So it's
Whatever overlap to me is beneficial. We look at it from a particularly different view than what I believe the grand jury does. We work with them. I get a call every year to go meet the grand jury, talk about some basic mechanics of local government. And they're looking, and of course, they're driven by complaint for one.
sure.
And it's not just about the fix. It's about identifying the problem. Well, I think from our perspective, my perspective is I'm not here to penalize or to call anybody out for being bad. I just want to make sure that they have plans in place, and whatever I can do to encourage them through
Right.
the commission's authority to improve those plans, that's great. And so we have a role that goes beyond just criticizing, if you will, but we want to help implement something that makes a difference.
Right. I agree.
If that answers.
Yeah, no, it does. I don't want to mess up those lines, but I think we can do that if we work together.
So in relation to what you just shared with the commission today and your plans at the conference and hopefully a byproduct after the conference and everything, that product that you create might be a good guide to share not only with the county, but all the municipalities in Butte County as well as special districts as it relates to under general plan law, at least for the cities and the county, and the safety element aspects. There's an interrelationship there, and hopefully that'll help when those elements are updated. They're updated in such a manner that you interact with everybody else, where you have beneficial to be prepared for disasters and so forth. And similarly, special districts in their master planning, that might be a helpful tool to educate the special district providers and have them do that in their updates as well. So
That's spot on, Mr. McGree. And I'll say Shannon actually stole information from Paradise, the safety element that he's just recently put through.
it's in draft.
Yes. So yes, that's great. And that's the kind of thing we want to promote. And so let's just say City of Chico, since they're not here, we'll pick on them. You know, if we see in there that when we update their MSR, that they really haven't put much effort into looking at that WUI interface on the eastern interface of the city, we'll call that out. Not to say that, you know, hey, you're a terrible agency. Just, you know, before you start moving on and developing additional lands, put these preparedness steps in place. We want to know that you're capable of evacuating your town or responding to these disaster events if need be. Chico doesn't maybe have the same flooding issues as say Oroville might, or Gridley and Biggs if there was a problem with the dam. But nonetheless, that, you know, we all suffer from earthquakes. Chico could have still had wildfire issues. They probably wouldn't have been as demonstrable as what happened elsewhere, but it still could have been a problem if they weren't prepared, and they need to be prepared. So we hope that adding this to an MSR, not just here in Butte, but all around us, will make a big difference. And I add one more thing I think it's really important is when you look at the amount of grant money that comes flowing through Cal OES, FEMA, and USDA, there's a variety of agencies that put out a lot of money. And when you have a preparedness plan, you are going to get money. If you're coming at the end of the curve and only asking for recovery help, you're going to get help, but you're not going to get the same amount of help you're going to get if you start with them in a time when it's calm and you can get those grants in place to put those plans in place. Because as we all know, ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So I think that's what's really important here is making sure that every agency has a plan so that they can start looking for grant funding to implement the components of the plan. You could probably write a book on it up there in paradise. You've probably gotten every possible grant opportunity that, and to your benefit or to your credit, your staff has seized that and took advantage of it. But because you have good plans in place, it's easy to go to Cal OES and say, we have this in place, we just need this to fund the implementation. Great. You're already on your way. Another agency who has not done all the pre-planning, they're at a disadvantage when it comes to funding. So this is another good reason to do it. And so many things come back to dollars.
A couple things. One, I think that there should be interagency cooperation, like in the case of large landslides after all these fires, where if we get a El Nino and it gets really wet, I can see road blockages and problems even with water supply in certain places. And then the other thing is we've had everything but locusts and earthquakes, but I'll put it out there. If there was a major earthquake, we could lose infrastructure, and we should have some sort of plan how to cooperate between agencies to get the infrastructure up and running. And so we might consider those things. And then if that ever happens, we'll look really smart and forward thinking. If it never happens, they'll blame us for wasting their money and time. But the reality is we should plan for those things too,
We all know what side of the coin we should be on, right?
ahead of it. Any other comments? Thank you.
Moving on to some other general notes. There's not much to talk about that's changed, except for with the county service area reorganization. You might recall we had that discussion a month ago, sort of a vague way. And we talked about some of the things that
That's
we
something
felt
we
could
gotta
be
work
done
on.
better in the county service area department. Board of Supervisors had a whole meeting or an item on the meeting about it. Literally the day after our meeting, we got contacted by County Public Works to come over and sit with them and talk about the process, what the county service areas look like, just the entire structure of how they are implemented. It was Shannon and I went. It was a very good conversation. We provided them a ton of information and saw a lot of heads doing this, and we didn't know that even existed, kind of thing. And again, that's what we're here for. We're here to provide information and help. And that strategic relationship with Public Works when looking at these CSAs, it's going to be instrumental in how to get them cleaned up and being more efficient in what they do. And I think we started that process a week ago, and I look forward to talking with the county more about how to manage the CSA program and probably bring back some perhaps recommendations for the commission to consider. It wouldn't be my place to tell the county what to do or recommend. We're just providing information and help. But at some point, it might result in me asking you, can we make some specific recommendations to the county about CSAs? But we're not quite there yet.
So will you be looking at possible CSAs for having them be dissolved? I mean, are you going to you're going to put together a list over time?
We've already done it.
Okay.
When we put together what we call it was a CSA municipal service review. It's the Bible. It's this thick. And before that existed, again, I can't help but give Mr. Betts, our former deputy executive officer, props for putting that together. It took a long time and a lot of research to get it there, but it is now the definitive work. The county, if you don't have that in your county office and you deal with CSAs, then you don't have the right book. But that recommended various dissolutions. It recommended things where the CSAs were wildly underfunded and they needed to be improved. Some cases they were wildly overfunded for nothing more than streetlights, and they were holding huge reserves. So these are all things we look at up to and including, as you're all well aware, in North Chico, there's 16 different CSAs developed over time, primarily for the same things, but because they were done one-off for every subdivision, there was never a coordination of all of that. We pointed out on that MSR that there's a lot of potential to reorganize, come up with different, a single assessment for things like flood control, drainage maintenance, street lights, fire hydrants. These things should not be done one-off. There's no reason to do it. All fire hydrants, maintenance, and access to water, that ought to be all under one rubric. The costs are very similar. Is it going to take a lot of work to get there? Yeah, we have to sort of unravel this from where we started, where the county years ago was favorable to forming lots of CSAs, to where now they're not favorable to doing them. So now we have to figure out how do we better maximize what they have, get rid of the stuff that doesn't need to be there and reorganize stuff together so that we can get the numbers down, more efficient, and the cost reduced. And at the end of the day, what does all that mean? That means the service at the end at those people's houses is going to be a better service. So that's our goal, is to help the county get there.
Yeah, I'd love to see us make that a priority. I mean, if we can, I know it's not a high priority, but to start, chipping away at those that need to be dissolved, or like Bill said, need to be combined. I'd love to see that happen over time. And I know you only have 4 staff, but let me ask you a question. Who at the county do you work with? Is there someone at Public Works that you're going to work with to oversee this?
We
or?
presumably there was yes, Public Works, and then they assigned 2 individuals to work directly with. One is the CSA coordinator.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the official county title in the
Mhm.
payroll book, but she is the person who has been assigned to basically manage this and start to grab as much information. And those are the 2 people that Shannon and I met with a week ago. It was an hour-long or so conversation, and like I said, it was an eye-opener for them to learn a lot of what they just had never had any reason to know before us. So I don't mean to say that these people aren't doing what they should be doing. It just never came up to that level, and now they're applying resources to it. So I'll keep you up to date on this monthly.
Well, and I'll mention it at our next board meeting too, that we think it's a priority to move forward. There's no reason to have these CSAs that aren't doing anything.
Right. And I think a lot of it will be, you end up seeing at the board questions about how do you reorganize how the CSAs come to be? Does it get generated out of a subdivision map through development services? Or does it come through the fire department or environmental health or public works? There's not a real clear chain of command, if you will. At one time, the county years ago, Mr. Connolly may remember this. We offered these same comments, and they had aggregated it up to one person in the CAO's office who we contacted directly. That was our point. And then she in turn distributed information or collected information for us. And that was working really well. And then it seemed to suddenly, for whatever reason, get diffused back amongst various departments. And I think that's where I started to see breakdowns in the process.
It's because we had complaints, and unfortunately the public's somewhat naive or doesn't know what's going on. And then when it impacts them, then it rose to the level of complaints. But I think we should get in front of it. And I think you bring it up at the next board meeting that it's inefficient government.
Yep.
And maybe if you have a lighting district and you're adjacent to one, instead of creating a new one, you join it and you have an efficiency of higher numbers. Things like that could happen. Yeah,
Well, Bill and I'll do our part to see what we can.
I'll be right behind you.
Thank
Chad.
you, Bill. I figured you always are. You always have my back. I appreciate that. No, but I mean, there's several out there. I mean, how many CSAs are there? I forget.
Presently, I think the latest count is 62.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many? 58. Jen, her brain's smarter than mine.
Well,
Or her
I
memory,
guess
at least.
I guess I shouldn't say this, but I'm not in favor of creating any new ones unless it's absolutely necessary.
Understood.
So anyway, enough said.
Rational
Thank you.
growth.
Couple other things just real quick, just because there's some fresher updates. Water districts, we just actually met yesterday with, Jen and I met with Biggs West Gridley Water District. Interesting thing there, just as an aside, used to be everybody was in the district. There were urban parcels, 1/4 acre lots, everything up to, hundreds of acres of farmland. And because that's how it all started. And they now realize that they don't want to have to keep people on standby, and they're never going to get water. They're never going to need water for their 1/4 acre lot. So we're working with them to go through and systematically detach parcels that no longer really will ever have that service. The tough ones are in the middle, and some of you might know this, especially if you live in that area. It's sort of the mom and pop calving operations running off of a couple acres. And yeah, they want to flood their pasture twice a year, and and the water's cheap. So don't get me wrong, it's far easier to just flood your pasture than it is to run your pump with a ditch. And those are not going to be in jeopardy, mind you. They know that those still have value. But this is really to just get the district sort of out of the urban game, if you will, completely, and just get back to just providing surface water to farmland and people who are in need of it. And I will,
I would say that also, I just had a meeting with Butte Water District.
Hmm.
I would say that that's a very similar situation.
and you might recall a couple months back, Shannon brought an item forth where we did some cleanup for them as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I will say, just because this is a good opportunity for anybody who cares, is both Mark Orm at Butte Water District and Danny Robinson over at Biggs West Gridley now. They have been outstanding to work with. They
Good.
have come full, the whole dynamic has changed within the last 2 years or so with these districts. And we have heard from them a lot, and we are now, it's just been a joy to work with them because they're doing all the right things. And staying out of the politics as best we can. So that's a good thing. I will just transition since we're down on that part of the county. I would be remiss to say that we're not still continually having some issues in Gridley and Biggs. And just lately, there was a big kerfuffle over electrical service maintenance between the two. And we're not in the middle of that, just that it's created some conflict. And it's just disappointing. We, as you might, Mr. Kimmelshoe will tell you, and certainly Bruce, we were starting to get really close relationships. Things were talking. And then in this last few months, just things have not gone as well. And some issues have come up that are dragging us into it. And I'm not going to get into it because it's really just mostly politics. But what was clear, and I know you, Mr. Kimmelshoe, received an email that I had sent out because it was part of a larger group of people. I think, Bruce, you probably were on it too. You must have been. And I responded back to the city of Gridley's planning director's comments about growing north to Biggs. And we outlined a process. You were at that meeting, and we want to make sure that process stays on track. This isn't we went from who can get most of the area of concern fastest to where now we have to sit back and let's plan for that area cooperatively and share services. And then suddenly now we've got a proposal to bump another subdivision much further north into closer to Biggs. And it's all going to get worked out, but I'm just warning you that it's going to be LAFCo is going to be the regulatory heavy hand in the process, because at the end of the day, all of it's going to require sphere amendments and annexations of territory. And they're going to have MSRs that support what they want to do. So whatever they think they can get away with or do right there, we are going to be there to put the brakes on it if it's not going well. And I hope the commission continues to support me in that process, because it's essential. We can't afford to let this area of concern not get proper planning. It's a great potential for not just those two cities, but provide housing for the county as a whole. It's several thousand acres of land that it just needs to be done right. We don't need a bunch of 1 acre ranchettes out there. That's not going to solve anybody's housing problem. So
I do have a comment. I can say this, I'm very frustrated. And Bo Shepherd's very frustrated, and that's the only comment I'm gonna make.
Fair enough. I can say that
Wish you guys were mayors.
about 15 years ago, it was way worse than this. So remember that when they were going to have rail crossings and 2,700 homes at a time, and or Gridley and Biggs couldn't decide where it'd be. And oh my gosh. And then it all went away. And I thought it was all getting way better.
It
was.
Yeah. Well, we'll work through it.
We will.
So that's all I have on that. I just wanted to let you know that we're going to spend a lot of time working with both of those agencies, trying to get this forward. I actually will be going to a big city council meeting on October 10th. I will go down, and I was invited to participate, just to ask questions that the council might have about growth and development. So that might have been a surprise to you, but
What meeting is that?
it's their city council meeting, and I think it's October the 10th. Maybe
Okay.
Shannon can remind me. I don't know, but
Okay,
it's
next Monday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday, whatever it is. Okay.
So,
Good. All right, tell me when it is.
Must
I want
see
to
TV.
be there too. So,
okay, I'll let you know.
okay.
Nothing more on that. I'm gonna move on. Chico Island annexations, just quick note. We did them all, and we had one that went to protest, Chico Canyon. Actually, I'll let Shannon fill you in on it because she had recent contact with the city clerk.
Sure. So the formal mailed ballot election concluded yesterday for the Chico Canyon Road Island annexation. As of 5 o'clock last night, Debbie Preston informed me that they had a 61% turnout for the election, which is pretty impressive.
It is.
So she spent the entire day validating signatures, and she has technically 7 days to accept all postmarked ballots that come in the mail and 30 days to call the election. But she thinks that within the next couple of days, she'll be able to get me some sort of response. And so we were hoping to have something to give to you today, but probably today or tomorrow, she'll end up giving me some sort of result on that, but won't officially call the election for 30 days.
So Shannon, I've had some questions on folks on this protest election. It's by parcel, it's not by person.
It's by registered voter.
Oh, it is. It's by
Yeah,
registered voter.
so, yeah.
Okay, so if you had 6 registered voters living in one
Yep.
place, okay.
So the
Oh,
protest election was different because it was landowner and registered voter. And so there's a different mix of votes that we could accept for the protest. But for the mail ballot election, it's registered voter only. So you don't even have to own land in the territory to vote.
just live there.
Just be registered to vote there. Yep.
But the what's going on right now and the signatures that are being validated is the protest.
It's the formal election.
The
So
formal election,
the
okay.
protest concluded back a couple months
Yeah,
ago.
that's right. Yeah.
Which
we-
triggered the election.
Which
Okay,
triggered
so
the
this,
election. for this-
whatever, if it goes down, I mean, if it goes to defeat or people say they don't want the
Yes.
annexation, that stands.
Yes,
For
so-
2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
can bring it up again
we can't
too.
consider another proposal for the 2 years. We have a island annexation agreement between us and the city of Chico that sort of hinges on all of these areas passing an election. So we may need to consider some sort of revision to that agreement, which their planning staff is open to, but we'll just sort of cross that bridge when we get there. And until then, it'll probably take, some developer driven momentum to get that going again.
So when you say 61%, it's 61% of the registered voters have
Turned in some
participated.
sort of ballot.
That
yeah,
is incredible.
Or turned in a ballot, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Good.
just make it one clear point, just if you're a landowner, but you're not a registered voter, you
Yeah.
didn't get a vote.
Got
It's
it.
simply
No,
just
interesting.
registered voters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm sure it will go. I'm sure they won't want to be annexed. I mean, and that would be the very first one
That failed.
That failed, at least in the Chico area.
Yes.
But if there's no.
All the others were islands and there was no potential for a vote. But this one, we knew there was some hostility within the area.
Well, I think most of it has to, in the people I've talked to in that area, are very concerned about how zoning would change.
Right.
I mean, if there's a lot of 1 and 2 and 3 acre parcels in that area. And, if it goes into the city, their feeling is that it could be divided into, 1/4 acre lots or whatever, and the whole neighborhood could change. So,
And the cautionary note on that is, while they think that is the case now, if you look at the northeast side of Chico,
Okay.
you see Anothis, Cactus,
okay.
Mariposa, you all who been around long enough know that was a lot of horse country, rural properties. The city went out there, started subdividing it. We put a lot of protections in for the existing rural users, but at the end of the day, you know what turned the corner? It wasn't the city coveting it or us making it. It was individual landowners who saw the opportunity to profit on the property. So if the folks in Chico Canyon think that a 1 or 2 acre, 3 acre lot owned by somebody who doesn't come along and suddenly gets $3 million offer, that's what's going to make the change. As Shannon
You're
said,
right.
it's going to be developer driven.
But I think the most interesting thing you noted was I made the assumption that if they vote not to be annexed, then it would be the political will of Chico. And they probably wouldn't bother with it again for a while. But you said we have to change our agreement with Chico
We have an
Is that
agreement in place that
where they add
says.
sewer and then they have to
Yeah,
sign it, they
so
won't cook.
we've given them blanket permission to provide sewer to these island areas with the understanding that they would pursue annexation of the islands. And we sort of assumed that all the islands would be annexed at some point, and by 2026, the city would have not one island left. And so this sort of threw a wrench in the plan. So we'll have to think about what we want to do. We do know that lands south of Bruce Road and so not up above Chico Canyon. They are experiencing failed wells out there. The lots are smaller. And there's not a lot of potential for development out there, but they don't have land to replace their septic tanks. And so we're going to have to consider, do we continue to allow them to connect to the city sewer system without any plan to annex, or do we have the city pursue annexation of the lands just south of Bruce Road, or we may have to sort of take a look at that differently. So
do we, I guess we're not legally obligated to change our agreement with.
they are not, and we are not. We would
So why
just
don't
have
we,
to,
I mean,
there's no
this isn't
provision in
agenda,
there.
I'm probably getting off track. But I have a lawyer there, doesn't say anything, so all right.
It's just discussion under the executive officer's report.
Oh.
No action is being taken or recommended.
I don't think
It's in my mind, it's a non-issue right now. We don't have an issue in front of us. We don't know the results of the election, but we also don't know that the city is going to start coming to us with more sewer connections. There's not a lot of development happening out there. So until we sort of see that start to happen, it's happening in other areas of town more that are outside, sort of out on Chico River Road. Their septic tanks are failing. So we'll start putting the pressure on the city once they notify us, oh, we've connected this parcel and then this parcel and this parcel, then we start to put more pressure on them to say, it's time for you to figure out a way to get this area into the city.
But what I guess my point is, we don't have to change our agreement that when they extend services, they sign a they will not vote against annexation.
They are still doing that. They're still
I think we
yeah.
let it lay, not, till somebody protests or gets upset. Why would we change that?
To your point, I think where your head is, we will eventually accumulate enough agreements where the numbers will change the vote.
It might not be in my lifetime, but I'm just saying, you mentioned something, and I just want to, to me, I think I don't want to waste your time or our time. Just leave it. I would think we get head nods, we just leave it as it is.
Okay.
And when they have to have sewer, they have to sign an agreement that they won't fight annexation.
Yeah,
It's fair, it's a
that
city
is still in
service.
place. Yes.
And then when it tips, it tips.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, and if somebody doesn't like it, they can sue us and we'll figure it out.
No, that's
We'll
not
put Mr. Brown to work.
Philosophy.
Don't ever say that.
One more quick question on that. In that area that's proposed for annexation, are most of those folks on their own personal wells, or is that Cal Water that?
Cal Water serves a portion of
portion.
it, the sort of southerly south of Manzanita, Bruce Road area. But yes, most of those parcels are, I think up to Falcons Point, they have their own water tank and water system up there, but it's sort of, and Cal Water does not serve the entire site.
Okay, and then also most of that is all on septic at this point.
Yes, yes.
And,
There are
but
some.
but the
yeah.
city, under our agreement, may continue to provide sewer in that area.
The city has no intention of extending sewer up
No.
Chico Canyon. They don't proactively
Okay.
start putting in sewer in county areas. And so it'll be like a one-off. Somebody fits their tank fails, so they extend sewer one parcel, and then their tank fails, so they extend the sewer one more parcel.
Okay.
And it's all the landowner paying for that sewer to be extended to their parcel because they don't have room to put a new septic tank.
No. No.
Might be cheaper.
A lot of rock up there on that ridge
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. I want to talk to you guys then not at this meeting, but afterwards, maybe about the same situation I think kind of exists on Bidwell Avenue.
Yes.
I know we just
Yep.
annexed a portion of Bidwell Avenue, but the same issue as far as sewer, I
Yeah.
think, and we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
I'm sure you're happy to know that the creek now is in the city.
Well, I think it always has been. Yeah. That's a whole nother issue.
But it's definitely
now. There's nothing on that. I'll just a couple quick things. Orville MSR, there was a pause for a while. I would get into it was a contractual issue with the consultant, but we took over the continuation of, and I say we, I mean Shannon, And so she's been working diligently to update the document and get it complete. It's in its basically comprehensively put together form now. A couple more reviews and it'll go out for public review, 21-day public review. And our goal is to get it to you in December for consideration. So just as an FYI, it's taken longer than we would have liked, but a lot of it was out of our hands in terms of getting information and working with the consultant. Last thing on projects is this Tuscan Ridge project. This is just a new piece. This project, I wish I could tell you if there was any sort of clear direction. But I had gotten an email from both the engineer who represents the project and Mr. Lando who represents PID. They were under at least the landowner was under certain impressions things were going to happen, which was PID was going to serve. I had to write a similar letter like I did down in Gridley to say, well, wait a second. Here's how it really is going to happen. And the county needs to make some definitive decisions about what they want to do. This hanging it out there and saying, well, pick one of these 6 options for how you're going to do it. Frankly, that's not good planning. And I don't even think they're proper mitigations. A mitigation has to actually be specific and has to be implementable with a mitigation plan. And none of that is existing right now. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but I'm just keeping you up on the speed that project is still there. And they're still looking at PID as a potential service provider, which involves us finishing their MSR, looking at a sphere update for PID, ensuring that they can actually provide the service. And what does that do for between there and the intervening properties from where PID's boundary stops, which is basically where the old Kmart project was.
Well, the Walmart,
I meant, yeah,
then we're creating what we just tried to get rid of.
exactly.
Why would we do that? Why would we do that?
Well,
I mean,
talk to your
think-
supervisors.
No, we'll talk later, but thank you for talking to them because you're right. There's a lot of assumptions
Okay.
going on right now that are not the case. And it's crazy. It's crazy. We got to get on top of this thing.
Well, I can certainly appreciate the fact that anybody who decides they want to submit a land use application to any entity has the absolute legal right to submit that application and get that ball rolling.
Right.
This community, as far back as my 30 years, has said, no one wants to see a single house built between Lower Skyway at the end of the town and all the way down to Chico, aside from the few that are on the Butte Creek Canyon side that are there. But this idea that we're going to go right in the middle and pop this thing down just because PG&E put a camp there years ago.
Let me back up a little bit, being the old guy again. During a general plan update, though, there was considerable lobbying and support for development of housing around a golf course there. And that's where it came from. And that's why it was zoned the way it was. Now, so I can't say I heard a lot more input. It wasn't my district in support of it than I heard anybody opposed to it. So it's not kind of a fair statement to say nobody ever saw anything out there. And then, yeah, the golf course went away and the rattlesnakes and PG&E came in, but it's up to you guys now. I'm just telling you the history was it's zoned right. So somebody bought it thinking they had the potential to do it based on a general plan.
And Mo had that direction going. I mean, he was heading that direction,
Right.
but they
that's
were
the
all
case.
self-contained. I mean, they had 1 million gallons of water going on that golf course. They had their own water. They had all the,
Right.
well, now it's all completely changed. And now they think we've got to come in and rescue them. I don't get that.
So what I would say to that is that's where the MSR and LAFCo could say this would be growth inducing. We don't think you should put, I'm just making this up, water or sewer there. That has to be self-contained. And I think that's fair. Because there was no obligation to support that when they're zoning it for development. I'm just going way back. And of course, Mo's gone now.
Yep.
And it's not my district called Doug Teeter.
Hey, I'll pass on that one. And one last item, and this is disappointing, but since I wrote the letter and it's in your packet, this AB 399, this will get Bill all wild going, but this is that San Diego issue where the San Diego County Wood Authority wanted to force a change in LAFCO law after San Diego LAFCO had already decided to detach 2 properties. And and pay $26 million in back fees to massage the difference of loss of revenue. And anyhow, legislator got involved, tried to run a special bill, got through the legislature on an emergency process, got it in front of the governor. The letter you see attached is the letter I wrote for last minute to the governor, just encouraging him to veto. He did not veto the bill. And fortunately, it turned out not to be an urgency measure. So the bill, instead of taking effect immediately, won't take effect until January 1. San Diego LAFCo election on that, similar to the one Shannon just talked about, but on a much larger scale. That is actually scheduled for November 5th, I believe, in San Diego. So they're going to have their vote before the law takes effect. So I don't know.
Kidding me?
No.
Is that legal?
Yeah.
Ask our legal counsel. Can they vote on something where the law doesn't even allow it yet?
No. San Diego LAFCO is following the law as it is.
Oh, you're talking
The
about
new
something
law
else.
that they want to undo it with
Gotcha.
is
Okay.
not coming into January 1. So they're going to beat that new law by about 2 months. But they initially wanted that law to be an urgency measure. So that would have been immediately in place upon the governor's signature, which then would have disrupted the election process, which would have been,
Going to be a hot topic and a discuss.
it's a huge topic. Bill's been involved in a lot of conversations about it as well.
Basically, they create us. They somewhat empower us. They haven't given us enough power to really do a great job serving the public, but this is a case where they write a law around us,
They sure do.
and it's patently unfair, and it's not best governance. But the good part, there is a good part of this, is I think the special districts, even a lot of the cities, understand this is a bad practice. And I think if on a state level, and I'm going to challenge state LAFCo to do this, that even if we only have 40 votes out of 57 that we have in, we should pursue things that are wrong and try to oppose them, so that when a legislator attempts to do something like this, he knows he's going to have, or she's going to have pushback. Right now, we're passively sitting there and reacting to this. And I think by pulling the special districts and the cities together with us and say, you want rational growth, we need to fight these crazy things in a way that they don't want to do it. And I'm going to challenge them down there. I don't know what's going to change, but it's a pretty passive organization.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right? I mean,
Your opinions are welcome.
yeah.
But the bottom line is this,
Yeah.
this new law or legislation, it will set a precedent to weaken LAFCOs around the state of California. Essentially.
With regard to this issue.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And this was a water district issue. Exactly. Yeah. Just a side note, my son is a lobbyist down there, and he was lobbying on behalf of, the city of Fallbrook, right? On this issue. And it was a real battle. It was
Yeah.
a battle royale in legislature. And they did weaken the bill a little bit from what he has told me.
That
but
was
still.
taking out the urgency measure.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
what it
yeah.
was. So anyway, yeah, I just hope it doesn't set a precedent to weaken, I don't want to say the power, but the authority of LAFCo.
Well, as I'm sure all of you might have said at one time or another, as long as the legislature's in session, the
Yeah.
ability to undermine us always exists.
We're only safe.
That's all I have for you today.
Didn't talk about initiative.
Oh, I didn't even put anything in here on it.